right, hello, welcome. I'm Austin Durant, and this is a new segment that I'm trying out called 15-minute ferments. And the idea is that just about any preparation of most fermented dishes takes really just a few minutes. In this case, the longest part is waiting for the things to ferment. So I've spent a little bit of time configuring the studio here. So I've got this shot and I've got the overhead shot. So what I'll do is, as I start preparing things, I'll just go to this overhead shot, and then I'll be the little minimized guy in the corner there. So that is what we're going to do tonight is make hummus, and we're going to ferment the beans before we make the hummus. So it's called fermented hummus, but essentially it's fermented beans that we then use to make hummus. So if you guys have questions or comments, please use the chat window. Be happy to answer questions. So everybody good on what we're going to cover tonight? I think there's a little bit of a delay as well, but nothing too crazy. All right, so what we're going to do, the first thing we're going to do is prepare our legumes. So fortunately, you can use just about any type of legume, whether that's, tonight we're using green lentils, chickpeas or garbanzo beans is of course the traditional legume that's used to make hummus, but you can really use anything. I've used lima beans, I've used black beans, red lentils, any legume at all, since we're basically going to be processing it in the food processor. Pretty much lends itself well to making hummus. So the first step is to soak the beans. And this is true whether you're just cooking them and eating them right away. You always want to soak dried beans for a good long time. So I like to do this overnight. So I'll usually start soaking the beans in the evening right before I go to bed. So what I've got here is about 300 grams. It's a little under a pound of lentils that I pre-weighed. And then I'm going to add to it 900 milliliters of water, so about 3 times the weight of water in order to do the soaking. And that could also vary from bean to bean, but for most beans, that's a good starting point. All right, so we've got our beans ready to soak here. And if you want, you can go ahead and add a little bit of pickle brine at this point. So this is pickle brine that I've collected from previous pickle batches over the last few months. It's not necessary for this step, but go ahead and if you want to, throws a little bit of acid in there and a tiny little bit of flavor. And then I'm basically just going to cover this and let it sit overnight. And in the morning, I'm going to basically just cook it. So what I'll do is I will cook it. Let's see if I can pull up a slide here while I'm talking. So the basic process for making fermented hummus is soak the beans overnight and then drain the beans out and then cook them. But you want to cook them a little bit less, what we call al dente, a little bit less than we would if we were eating them right away. And the reason is because when we do the fermentation, it's going to continue to basically digest and prepare the beans for the hummus. Then, once we finish cooking them, we're going to let them cool off, and then we're going to create a brine, which is basically just salt and water mixed together, and soak them in the brine for a few days. So that's fast forward to what I've got here. So I'll go ahead and get back to our overhead. So cook the beans, let them cool down a little bit, mix the brine about a 4% strength, and then I also spiked that with a little bit of pickle juice too. And now what we have is I've let this sit at room temperature for about 3 days, and what we've got is basically, this is the fermented beans. So they have a nice sort of sour aroma to them. And you can see, if you look, let's see if I can get it up to the camera here, there's a little bit of what we call commis, which is a harmless yeast that arrives, and so legumes are no exception. You can just see it's just starting to form a little bit of layer it's kind of a scum, but it's not going to harm you. If I wanted to, I could just scrape this off. Let's say this was a batch of sauerkraut. I could just scrape it off, and everything would be fine under the brine. But since we're doing it a little bit different here, what we're going to do is basically drain the beans now. So I've got a wire mesh strainer, and these beans, which again have been fermenting for about 3 days, and 2, 3, 4 days, it's really up to you. The more you let them ferment, the more pronounced that sour flavor is going to be. So we're ready to go. So these have been soaking in the brine for a couple days now. So I'm basically just going to drain them. Welcome, if you just joined us. We're in the middle of making a batch of fermented hummus. And I just explained that we've taken the beans, we've soaked them overnight, then we cooked them, then we cool it down, then we added it to a brine and let that brine ferment for 3 days. So that's the part where fermentation comes in. We're fermenting the cooked beans. All right, so I've got my beans now. I'm just going to let the drain water drain out. And again, this is pretty salty. If it was kind of slimy, some beans do tend to form some slime when they're fermenting, even if it's just a few days. Then you could give it a quick rinse. But these lentils seem to be pretty okay here. And I'm not going to rinse them. And another reason I'm not going to rinse them is because there's still residual salt on the beans. So just gives us a way to reuse some of that salt. All right, so you can kind of see. I'll see if I can get it closer to the camera. The dried or drained, I should say, green lentils. And then this basically becomes the base for making hummus. So I'm just going to drain it out nice and good. And then this brine at this point, I'd probably just toss it because it's got a little bit of funkiness to it. And because we were fermenting beans, there's some proteins, and that can attract some weird critters. So I would basically just dump this brine. I wouldn't try to reuse it. Other types of vegetable brines you could probably get away with reusing a little bit of, but this stuff we're just gonna dump it. Or you could compost it because it's probably got a lot of proteins and stuff in it. All right, so at this point now, I'm gonna get rid of my brine, and I'm just going to start using my food processor. This is what we're going to use to make the hummus. I'm just going to add all the beans to the food processor, and we'll need that strainer in a little bit here. And then this basically becomes a traditional hummus recipe after this. So I like to add, it's a very traditional lemon juice, some fresh garlic, some tahina, which is basically just ground sesame ground into a paste. A little bit of salt. Again, we may not need it. We'll just do that as we go. And then I like to put in some fresh herbs. So I've got fresh cilantro out of my garden, which is just flowering now. So it's just kind of ending its life cycle. But I like to use the wispy flower ends for, not the flowers, but with the wispy leaves once it starts flowering, to just throw in. It kind of works like dill. You really don't even need to chop it. But so I'll add this to the mix. So that's basically what I'm going to do. Add all the ingredients. Got my beans. I'm going to take a couple of cloves of garlic, just raw. So you guys ever made anything with, have you guys ever fermented beans? I guess that's the first question. If so, what kind have you made? So I'm just peeling the garlic here. And I'm just going to give it a rough chop, because we are going to put it in the food processor, so it's going to get pretty well mixed up. Just kind of a rough chop like that. Add it to the food processor. And next thing I'm going to do is juice a lemon. So lemon juice is a very traditional hummus ingredient. So I got a fresh lemon. Just going to cut it. And this is where I'm going to use my strainer once again, basically to strain out the seeds. I'm just going to put that right on top of my work bowl, and then just use a reamer here, a fruit reamer, to Squeeze the lemon juice into the bowl. You've accidentally fermented beans. Yes, I think we've all done that. That's cool. Things do tend to ferment on their own, even if we don't want them to sometimes. So that's a good lesson. All right, so this is the juice of 1 lemon. For this recipe, it's probably going to be enough. You can always add more to taste. All right, so I've added the juice. I've got the garlic and the beans in there. So now I'm going to take it for its first spin. Yes, it's a good recipe. You will dig it. So I'm just going to set this for a spin for a moment. Maybe I'll I'll mute the mic, but hopefully it's not too terribly loud for you. All right, so we're just starting to get up. And fortunately, lentils are an easy bean because they're already pretty small and almost kind of mushy even when you cook them. So it's going to be an easy bean, easy spin in the food processor here. All right, so I've got the first thing down. Next thing I want to do is add a few more ingredients. So I'm just going to now add the tahina, which is the sesame seed paste, and I'm going to add the herbs at this point. So what I'll do is I'm just going to pick off some of this beautiful cilantro. And I also love using dill. It's actually one of my favorites. I prefer to use dill, but my dill plant is just a little baby right now. I didn't want to steal his leaves yet. Probably another week or two, I'll be able to start harvesting a little bit of dill for the kitchen. So I'm just going to take my cilantro, which I think it technically is a weed, but fortunately it's an edible weed that makes lots of good things. And then just going to grab a handful-ish or so. Just pick off the fronds. I could even probably pick off the flowers. They'd be delicious in there too. And let's see, just get a couple more leaves here. So we're making hummus, and we've just spun the green lentils that have been fermented for about 3 days. And we're about to add a couple more fresh herbs and a couple other traditional hummus ingredients. How's the sound and the video and all that? Is that pretty good, guys? Again, this is pretty experimental, so appreciate you being part of the pilot test. But can you hear me all right? Can you see everything all right? So I'm just gonna do a fine chop of the herbs. Toss them in. And as far as the tahina goes, sometimes it settles, it likes to settle. So what you want to do is, if that happens, you'll see kind of like a clearer part of the oil at the top of the liquid. But it's pretty good. This is pretty good as it is. And sometimes you'll also see these, like, if you go down to the bottom, it'll kind of chunk up on you. So, but this is a pretty fresh batch. I mean, I've had tahina sit around in my pantry for up to a year, and it's totally fine. It's totally stable. All right, cool. Thank you for the feedback about the sound and stuff. All right, so I'm going to add probably, again, the recipe is I haven't linked it yet, but if you go to fermentersclub.com and /hummus, you'll see the recipe. It should have just posted as far as getting the ingredients and the ratios down. So I'm going to add, it's probably going to wind up being about 3 to 5 tablespoons of tahina. All right, let's start with that, and then we'll take it for another spin. And this is where I can also start to drizzle on the olive oil. So I like to use extra virgin olive oil because we're not cooking it. Extra virgin olive oil is fairly very florally, very fruity. Typically, you don't want to cook with it too much because it's sort of like, it'd be like cooking with the fine wine. So good olive oil, since we're not cooking it, kind of like what we would use in a salad. So I'm gonna start it, and then I'm gonna drizzle the olive oil in as we go. So you can kind of see it already sort of has that characteristic hummus. It doesn't, almost like I said, it doesn't matter what you start with as far as the bean, eventually it all ends up and looks like hummus. So you can kind of see this is what the texture's like. I think it needs a little bit more spinning, but I do want to also give it a taste. So I'll just do that, just to adjust for things like, well, all the ingredients. All right, so it's coming along. I'm glad I didn't just go ahead and add salt to it because, again, it already is fairly salty. I think I'll need to add a little bit of salt, though. Definitely has enough tahina in it. Definitely needs a little bit more oil. Could probably get away with squeezing another, maybe a half lemon or so, or a lime. But I'll just do a pinch or two of salt. I like to keep things on the less salty side, and then, you know, whenever I'm serving, let people add salt if they want. It's easy. It's much easier to add it than to take it away, right? All right, so we got a little bit more salt. We'll be drizzling a bit more olive oil in. Like I said, I think I do want to add a little bit more acid, so that's usually in the form of lemon juice. But being an avid fermenter, I've got on hand basically a bottle of pickle brine, so I'm going to use that instead. And that's going to, again, this is from many batches of pickles, so it's already got a garlic and a dill flavor to it. So it's going to add just a little splash of it. And then give it another spin, add some more olive oil, and we should be good to go. Now this is looking really good. In fact, this is kind of